Trey Gowdy. He put out a statement a short time ago, documented what he described were the number of times that the former FBI director couldn't remember, didn't know, or did not recall. And the figures he released was 71, 166, and then 8, as you see here. And if you do some quick mental arithmetic, you see that's about 230 times in a document that is about 240 pages in length. Some of the topics that he could not provide information on were key topics of interest to the Republicans, which would be the dossier that was used to secure a surveillance warrant on a Trump campaign aide, Carter Page. He could not say who paid for it. He does not recall seeing the key details of the FISA application itself, and he was unaware of this relationship between the former British spy Christopher Steele, who did the research on the dossier, the Justice Department official who helped get some of that information to the FBI in the fall of 2016. The FBI was also getting the dossier, it's important to note, through other channels. And then also this issue of the funding. It was funded by the DNC and the Clinton campaign. But Director Comey says in his testimony in a line of questioning to one of the Democrats on the committee that he just didn't feel that that information about which political party was funding it was really that germane or relevant to the surveillance court. What mattered is that they knew it was some kind of political document, John.
That brings us to the Russia investigation.
That's right.
What have you learned about that based on these transcripts?
Well, going through the transcripts, one of the key headlines, at least to us here at Fox, based on our reporting, is that he documents that in the summer of 2016, when they opened the Russia counterintelligence investigation that was looking at alleged contacts or coordination between Trump campaign officials and Russia, that there were 4 individuals that they were investigating at that time. So we know about the aide Carter Page. He was the subject of the surveillance warrant. We know about George Papadopoulos, who recently pled guilty to lying to federal investigators. But the other 2 are kind of a blank. One could be Paul Manafort, and another could be the former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn, but we're not clear on that at this point. It's important to note that Director Comey goes on to say that there was never a direction from the Obama administration to open the campaign on the campaign at that time, pardon me. And he says in a line of questioning with the Democrats, quote, "I know that we never investigated the Trump campaign for political purposes." Congressman Deutsch, did President Obama or anyone in his administration ever make a demand or a request the FBI or the Justice Department infiltrate or surveil the Trump campaign? Mr. Comey, no, not to my knowledge. The other footnote I would say in this section is that we have new detail about Director Comey's decision to draft a memo documenting his meeting with about National Security Advisor Mike Flynn. That was a meeting they had in February, and it was at that meeting, according to the FBI director, that the president said, "I want to see if you can let go of this Flynn situation," because Flynn had resigned at that time. What we know from the transcript is that there was a meeting among senior FBI officials about Comey's conversation with the president about Flynn, and based on the transcript, the focus of that is whether it amounted to obstruction of justice. What's worth noting here is that they decided in a very conscious way to keep that information with the FBI and not to share it with then Attorney General Jeff Sessions, because they had already calculated that he would recuse himself from the investigation. And I mention this because it was this type of behavior during the Clinton email case, of the FBI taking over a lot of responsibility of areas that might naturally fall to the Justice Department, that they were highly criticized for doing with the emails. And now we see something similar happened with the obstruction of justice question in the Russia case.
Yeah, and you can tell from reading the transcripts that many members of Congress weren't happy about that decision. What about Lisa Page and Peter Strzok? FBI employees at the time, worked for Mr. Comey. What did he say about them?
Well, I think there's a very important section about Peter Strzok. One of the questions for Republicans has been whether the political bias that was exhibited in the text messages exchanged by Peter Strzok and Lisa Page bled into the investigations, either the email investigations or the Russia investigation. And what Director Comey testified to were Strzok's involvement in that letter in October of 2016, which went to Congress and led them to reopen the email investigation right before the election. And he says in his testimony, quote, "In fact, Peter Strzok helped draft my letter to Congress on October 28th that Hillary Clinton blames for her defeat. So it's hard for me to see how he was on Team Clinton secretly at that point in time. And he also was one of the handful of people in the entire world who knew we were investigating 4 Americans. Remember, we talked about this earlier. 4 Americans who had some connection to Mr. Trump during the summer of 2016, and he didn't tell a soul." So on the one hand, the former FBI director is very critical of Strzok and Page for the anti-Trump bias or political bias that's shown, but he also doesn't throw them under the bus in the sense that he says here that Peter Strzok was one of the only people who knew about the Russia CI investigation involving the Trump campaign. He did not leak that information, and he also helped draft that letter that went to Congress that reopened the email case on the eve of the election, as the director notes Hillary Clinton has blamed as one of the main reasons for her defeat in 2016, John.
I know those transcripts have been out just a couple of hours. You've done a great job digesting it on the fly, Catherine
Well, it's
Herridge.
really great reading, actually, if you're interested in this subject. There's a lot of great detail.
Really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Catherine, thanks for bringing it to
You're
us.
welcome.
We'll let you get back to reading it. Thank you. Meanwhile, a major shakeup in the West Wing. President Trump announces White House Chief of Staff John Kelly will step down at the end of the year. The president confirmed Kelly's departure today on his way to the Army-Navy football game, saying a replacement will be announced in the next day or two. All this as the White House responds to a flurry of court filings from special counsel Robert Mueller. Prosecutors listing the alleged lies told by Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen, while recommending substantial prison time for the latter. Pardon me. Ellison Barber has the latest from the White House. Who do we expect to step in as president's chief of staff, Ellison?
Well, there are a couple of names that are floating around right now. The president not officially saying anything. Kind of the biggest question that seems to exist at this moment is, will the president announce a permanent chief of staff or a temporary interim replacement? The top contender, according to sources who have spoken to Fox News today, is the Vice President Mike Pence's chief of staff, Nick Ayers. A source in the administration and close to Ayers tells me that Ayers and the president have been in discussions for months about Ayers taking over as the White House chief of staff. The problem is the president wants a 2-year commitment, and so far Ayers has not been able to make that sort of commitment. Ayers has young children at home, 3 under the age of 6, and according to sources, he was planning to leave D.C. in December, but this source says the president and Mr. Ayers are still working on the terms of him taking over. The New York Times is reporting that Ayers told the president he would serve on an interim basis through the spring. As for current and now outgoing Chief of Staff John Kelly, rumors of his departure have been around for months. In July, President Trump asked General Kelly to stick around until 2020, but a couple of weeks ago, President Trump suggested that was no longer a sure thing. Here's the president this afternoon.
John Kelly will be leaving at the end of the year. We'll be announcing who will be taking John's place. It might be on an interim basis. I'll be announcing that over the next day or two, but John will be leaving at the end of the year. He's been with me almost 2 years, you know, between the 2 positions. So we're probably going to see him in a little while.
Special counsel Robert Mueller's team reportedly interviewed Mr. Kelly. A source here in the administration is telling me that departure had anything to do with the special counsel are incorrect. John?
Those most recent Mueller court filings, is the White House concerned about them, Ellison?
They don't seem to be, and the president reiterated that today.
I think it's all turning around very nicely. But as far as the report that we see, according to everybody I've spoken to, I have not read it. There's absolutely no collusion, which is very important.
Regard to Mr. Manafort's case is focused on lobbying related issues. She says that it says little about in her words, even less about collusion. On Mr. Cohen, Sanders says the filings do not provide any new or valuable information, adding, quote, Mr. Cohen has repeatedly lied, and as the prosecution has pointed out to the court, Mr. Cohen is no hero.
I wouldn't be celebrating it if I was at the White House. I think that's important because it's clear that they have implicated the president in the 2 campaign finance violations that Cohen pled guilty to and will be sentenced on. They have the president basically directing Cohen to commit these offenses. So, you know, these are 2 felonies that this guy pled guilty to, and they have the president directing it.
In the Cohen filings, there's a reference to political synergy. Despite that reference, President Trump's personal outside attorney, Rudy Giuliani, is insisting to Fox News that Cohen acted on his own here. John?
Ellison Barber, thank you. And following up on Ellison's reporting, new details emerged from Robert Mueller's court filings. Federal prosecutors recommending former Trump attorney Michael Cohen receive substantial time in prison. Meantime, the special counsel's team believes former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort lied about having contact with Trump administration officials. We have Fox News team coverage. Garrett Tenney is in Washington, but we begin in our New York City newsroom with Jackie Heinrich. Jackie.
John, what these documents don't contain are accusations of collusion between President Trump's campaign and Russia's meddling in the election. But they do give us a window into what the special counsel is zeroing in on. The first, news from Mueller that Cohen talked with a Russian national who offered political synergy with the Trump campaign and repeatedly suggested a meeting between President Putin and President Trump. Mueller says Cohen lied to Congress about details of a deal to create Trump Tower Moscow to alter the course of the investigation into Russian meddling and minimize links between the Moscow project and the president.
What's interesting about those 3 words, campaign, political, synergy, we haven't seen that before. The quote from Cohen is political synergy. The special counsel adds the word campaign. That's the first link, as tenuous as it may be, that we've seen.
The document also said Cohen was talking to contacts connected to the White House in 2017 and also this year, and Cohen admitted to circulating lies relating to the congressional inquiry. Mueller called the false statements a serious crime. The president, though, happy with the news from the Mueller camp this morning.
On the Mueller situation, we're very happy with what we are reading because there was no collusion whatsoever. There never has been. The last thing I want is help from Russia. Campaign.
The second court filing from the Southern District of New York implicates the president in a new way. This revelation deals with hush money Cohen paid to adult actress Stormy Daniels and former Playboy model Karen McDougal, who both allege they had affairs with the president. The bombshell there is prosecutors now say the president directed his attorney to make the payments, violating campaign finance laws. The president has maintained he didn't know where the money came from. Cohen is due to be sentenced on Wednesday for tax evasion, bank fraud, and campaign finance violations relating to the women's payments. John.
Jackie Heinrich, thank you.
Thank you.
Special counsel Robert Mueller's team also disclosing details about alleged lies told by Paul Manafort. Prosecutors say Manafort lied about his interactions with a consultant who had ties to Russia and about his interactions with Trump administration officials even after he was indicted. Garrett Tenney is live in Washington with more on that. Garrett.
Well, John, prosecutors say Paul Manafort lied repeatedly about a number of issues, and we still don't have a lot of details about those allegations because so much of this court filing was redacted. But prosecutors lay out 5 leading issues they say Manafort lied about, including a $125,000 payment through a political action committee to cover a debt that he owed, his contacts with a Russian-Ukrainian political consultant, Konstantin Kilimnik, who has ties to the Russian intelligence agencies, his attempts to work with Kilimnik to obstruct justice by trying to persuade witnesses to lie to Mueller's team about their business dealings in Ukraine. Significantly, though, prosecutors claim Manafort lied about his contacts with Trump administration officials after telling them he did not have any contact with the White House after the inauguration. Mueller claims in this court filing that Manafort had repeated contact with senior administration officials as recently as this past spring. The documents don't name the administration officials that Manafort was allegedly in contact with or what those conversations were about, but the special counsel says it has proof to back up all of its claims, saying in the court filing, quote, "These were not instances of mere memory lapses. If the defendant contends the government has not acted in good faith, the government is available to prove the false statements at a hearing." Now, Manafort's legal team continues to deny their client ever knowingly lied to investigators, and they now have 2 weeks to respond to these latest accusations. John?
Garrett Tenney, thanks.
You got it.
Many migrants are still in Tijuana, Mexico, hoping to gain asylum into the U.S. This as President Trump demands $5 billion for his border wall, or we might see a partial government shutdown. The latest on all of that ahead. And a concert turns deadly after a nightclub stampede. How many are killed and how many more are injured ahead? Plus, anti-government protests continue in Paris. How violent were the demonstrations today? A live report next.
Don't think confined to Paris. This is now happening across the whole of France. Indeed, on Thursday, there were tax offices out in the regions that were one burnt to the ground.
Protecting you and all of us. Plus, the Dems say they might roll out 40 candidates in 2020. Too many, too few, or both. Kevin Hart's out as host of the Oscars, but should he be? And the Christmas song that's getting banned from the airwaves. Have the popcorn and the peanut butter. Ooh. It's almost time for the greatest hour in the history of TV. 10 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss it.
Mô điểm được. Mô điểm
France's
được.
Interior Minister says violence from anti-government protests in Paris and across the country is under
Thế không biết
control.
được à?
However, he's calling the demonstrations, quote, totally unacceptable. More than 100 people were injured in the protests today, including 17 police officers.
Làm cho
There's
bà
a
không
protester on what she hopes to accomplish.
Tell Macron about our discontent. Me, I'm not here to break things because I have 4 children. So I'm going to try to be safe for them because they are here. They are afraid. I want to be safe for them because I want to go back home tonight. But I will want to be here. Stop. That's enough. This has to stop.
Our Greg Palcott is live in Paris with more. Greg.
John, Paris resting tonight, but not too easily. It has been a grueling day. The latest figures were 1,400 arrested, 135 injured, many of those in both categories here in Paris. We were out and about for the trouble today. Here's a bit of what we saw.
No, you're not looking at the Gaza Strip. This is the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Violent clashes between the yellow vest protesters, the anti-government protesters, and the police, the government. We're seeing percussion bombs, smoke bombs, replied with tear gas. Back and forth clashes between the two sides for much of the afternoon. We are standing here very close to the Arc de Triomphe. The police here are making sure that they do not get close to this, but there is a lot of action here on the main thoroughfare of this city.
Now, this is the 4th weekend of the so-called yellow vest protests. They are angry about a proposed gas tax hike, and that has brought into a protest about a lot of taxes coming from the government that these people feel is out of touch with the people. The violence a little bit less today than it was last Saturday, only because probably a massive, massive police show of strength. Also, the city basically shut down landmark stores and restaurants. Still, there was damage done, as you saw. Cars burned, windows smashed. Now, while the government of President Emmanuel Macron has given on some issues, including that gas tax, we still haven't heard from him. He's been pushing his prime minister out to do the dirty work. He is expected to get the axe in the next couple of days. As for Macron, John, he is said to speak to the nation maybe early part of next week, but a lot of people are saying it's too little, too late, and certainly the damage.
People are dead, dozens more injured after a stampede during a rap concert at a nightclub in central Italy. That according to police. Italian fire officials and news reports say concert goers panicked and headed for the exits after someone sprayed a noxious substance.
We are trying to determine who is responsible. And all the technical inspections must be performed as possible.
Ho il cuore spezzato.
My broken. It's the first time in 35 years that I've seen anything like this.
53 people are reportedly injured. Stampede, 13 of them in serious condition. 500 Central American migrants now in the Mexican city of Tijuana, just across from San Diego, asking for asylum from the U.S. government. That number is down from around 6,000 at its peak. This, as the president says, he might allow a shutdown. Congress does not approve $5 billion to build a border wall. Lawmakers now face a deadline of December 21st.
Is funding for fencing related to the border to repair. The president wants an additional $4 billion on top of that. And I don't think that that should happen now at all. And I don't think
fear, damage at home or retribution or violence. They will not be immediately. Finally, as you mentioned, the numbers going down and getting a little bit better in this state-run shelter here in Tijuana. Still tough conditions for people who walk some of them 2,000 miles to get here. Now many of them waiting patiently for that 3-month asylum process to work through. Others heading back home. Still others, an unknown number, crossing the border into the U.S. illegally. John, back to you.
Steve Harrigan in Tijuana. Thanks. Well, the White House is pushing back after dramatic court filings on Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen. What the latest legal drama could mean for President Trump.
This is about, things that Michael Cohen and Manafort did wrong. Specifically, one thing in common, both of them got caught lying, which is a bad thing, something that I would urge everyone not to do when you're under.
Released the transcripts from this week's closed-door interview with former FBI Director James Comey. Let's bring in Melanie Zanona, congressional reporter for The Hill. Mr. Comey insisted that if he was going to testify behind closed doors, that the transcript had to be released publicly. But now that it's out, I'm not clear on how it makes him look all that good. He didn't remember a lot of the key investigations that the FBI was conducting at the time.
That's exactly right, and that's why a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill are left incredibly frustrated right now. They said that he said, "I don't know," or "I don't recall," or "not to my knowledge," over 200 times, which is a lot considering that this transcript itself is only somewhere around 200 pages. So they are vowing to bring him back. They know that their days in terms of being in the majority and the House are numbered, so they're anxious to get in as much as possible while they still can. But it's unclear exactly what they got exactly out of this behind closed door testimony yesterday.
It appears that one of the things he didn't know about is that Peter Strzok had drafted and approved the Russia investigation details for the FBI. And he obviously became known as a partisan, an anti-Trump partisan during the course of the Trump campaign.
That is something that really stood out to me as remarkable, that he wouldn't know that given his position at the FBI. Something else that I also think really stood out was that he really defended Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, the two FBI agents who, of course, it was revealed that they were revealing anti-Trump text messages between one another. And he said Strzok actually helped him draft the letter, the infamous letter to Congress before the election, reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton, which, of course, Clinton has blamed somewhat for her loss in 2016. So he said, how can Strzok be on Team Clinton when he was part of this letter? But I think a lot of conservatives will find it very hard to believe that these two did not have political bias and, in fact, were pulled off the investigation because of that.
But he did say, did he not, that if he had it to do over again, or if he had known what Peter Strzok and Lisa Page were up to at the time and how they felt about the man who eventually won the White House, he would have booted them from those investigations.
He did say that. I wonder, though, if the reasoning behind that was because of all the fallout and the cloud that is really cast over things, not because he felt personally that they were politically biased in their work. But regardless, that's something, of course, Republicans, you can expect them to blow that out as well in the days to come as we really digest this transcript and continue reading through it.
He also professed not to know much about Michael Steele and the dossier that he produced during the course of campaign that was that was so anti-Trump. Even though this guy was an FBI source, the director of the FBI seemed to know almost nothing about him.
Right, which was really interesting. And something else he said was that, you know, it wasn't the funding, and he said the funding behind the dossier wasn't important, and that it was just that they knew that it was a politically funded document. They said it didn't matter where it came from when they were using this dossier as part of the launch into the investigation. Of course, that's been at the source of the controversy over whether or not there was political bias in the beginning stages of the investigation into the Trump investigation over the Russia collusion question.
There was a lot of news out of the Mueller investigation, which, you know, touches on what Director Comey and the FBI were looking into. But Sean Spicer was on Fox and Friends this morning saying that, you know, so far it's a dry well, the Mueller investigation. Listen to this.
I think the underlying premise of what this whole investigation always started about was collusion with Russia. 2 years in, we've seen nothing but a bunch of accounts of people who didn't pay their taxes, didn't file properly with the government, and who lied when asked by federal officials to tell the truth. None of those things have anything to do with colluding with Russia.
Does Sean Spicer have that right?
Well, he's right in that the documents that came out yesterday did not prove collusion. They didn't answer the question at all. But I think it's important to point out that this is not the Mueller report. These were sentencing documents regarding 2 individuals who have been targeted by the special counsel, and they were heavily redacted. However, I will point out that we are starting to see how Mueller is going to make the argument for collusion. He's starting to lay down those dots. We're not quite sure how he's going to connect them, but 2 pieces that were interesting in particularly the Mueller documents yesterday regarding Cohen was that, number one, early on in the campaign, he said he had interactions with a Russian national early on in the campaign who said they could offer political synergy with the Trump campaign. And number 2, Mueller is really starting to zero in on Trump's business dealings, and particularly the pursuit of a Trump-Moscow deal, which of course fell through, but it raises the questions of why were people like Cohen lying about it? Was there a potential conflict of interest? We'll just have to wait and see how Mueller exactly puts those pieces together.
A big shakeup at the White House today. The president announced that his chief of staff, John Kelly, the gatekeeper to the Oval Office, is leaving that job.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it wasn't entirely surprising. There's been rumors for months swirling around that his departure is imminent. Of course, the White House just wanted to let him leave on his own terms. The president still has clear respect for John Kelly. He offered him words of praise today, saying he's a great guy, he appreciates his service, and he was credited with bringing a lot of order to the White House. Now, his influence has waned over the past couple of months. Reportedly, he and the president have been at a sort of stalemate and not on speaking terms. And even though Republicans on Capitol Hill really like John Kelly and they trust him, they've also made the argument that it makes sense heading into 2020 to have someone who's a little bit more politically savvy as President Trump's right-hand man.
A busy week for you and all of us in the news business.
Certainly.
Melanie Zanona, congressional reporter for The Hill. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Chief of Staff John Kelly's departure is not the only staff shakeup coming to the White House. President Trump tapping a new attorney general, as well as nominating the next UN ambassador. Jillian Turner in Washington with more on all of that.
Yesterday, President Trump announced a pair of new appointments to his team via Twitter. First up, William Barr to fill the Justice Department vacancy left by Jeff Sessions and become the next Attorney General of the United States.
There's no one more capable or more qualified for this role. He deserves overwhelming bipartisan support. I suspect he'll probably get it.
Barr has a considerable foundation of support from conservatives thanks to his history of service at the Justice Department during the George H.W. Bush administration. He served as Attorney General, Deputy AG, and before that headed up the department's Office of Legal Counsel. But Democrats, though, are already lining up in opposition. The president also tapped Heather Nauert, current State Department spokesperson, to replace Nikki Haley as the president's representative to the United Nations. The former Fox News host is already being roundly criticized by Democrats on Capitol Hill as unqualified for the UN job, though she does have the support of key Republican Lindsey Graham, who responded to the news by immediately pledging his support. Also yesterday, former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson speaking out against President Trump, accusing his former boss of being undisciplined, opposed to reading, and worse.
We did not have a common value system. When the president would say, well, here's what I want to do, and here's how I want to do it. And I'd have to say to him, well, Mr. President, I understand what you want to do, but you can't do it that way. It violates the law. It violates the treaty.
President Trump shot back at Tillerson, tweeting, "He was dumb as a rock and I couldn't get rid of him fast enough. He was lazy as hell." The rift between those two men now on display for the U.S. and the entire world to see. The president also announcing yesterday that Army General Mark Milley will soon replace Marine General Joe Dunford as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. John?
Jillian Turner reporting on the fireworks in Washington. Jillian, thank you. Well, one automaker is ready to rev up the Motor City as other automakers are cutting jobs in Detroit. We'll tell you about that. Also, could the trade truce between the U.S. and China be in trouble? The latest development that is roiling our stock market and threatening to throw a monkey wrench into talks between the two nations.
We're not asking China to change their economic model. We're asking China to change the economic model that cheats. And that's a fair request.
Detroit marking the first new assembly line in the Motor City in 27 years. The move comes as General Motors last week announced plans to lay off workers in North America and close 5 of its plants. But a possible bright spot for both automakers could be on the horizon as President Trump agrees to hold off on raising tariffs on China for at least 3 months. And speaking of that trade truce, concern about an escalation in the dispute between Washington and Beijing led to a brutal week on Wall Street and unleashed another round of heavy selling on Friday. The arrest of a Chinese tech firm executive also adding to investors' jitters. Jeff Paul joins us from Los Angeles with more. Jeff.
Yeah, John, on Friday, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell by more than 500 points, bringing the weekly drop to more than 1,000. This makes for Wall Street's worst weekly drop since March. Analysts say there's a lot of anxiety in the market right now with growing fears of a U.S.-China trade war and slowing economic growth. Texas Congressman Kevin Brady says sometimes there's a disconnect between the stock market and the economy.
I know there are some of these uncertainties, but I think back home, and again, Main Street, boy, the confidence is very high. They're looking for workers, all size businesses. I do think, trade is an issue. I actually see these discussions, China is a very encouraging thing.
Congressman Brady referring to the ceasefire on any new tariffs that the U.S. and China agreed to after the G20 summit. But a few days later, President Trump tweeted on Tuesday, quote, "I am a tariff man." The Dow dropped 799 points that day. John?
And the arrest of that Chinese tech executive, Jeff, what's the impact that that's having?
Yeah, the arrest of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou happened while the telecom executive was transferring flights in Vancouver, Canada. The U.S. ordered the arrest, saying she had tricked financial institutions into making transactions with Iran, which violates U.S. sanctions. But National Economic Council Director Larry Kudlow says that was a law enforcement matter and doesn't think it should impact any economic progress.
They violated the sanctions with Iran. Okay, they violated the sanctions. They had been warned, and finally we had to prosecute that. And we thank our Canadian cousins for helping us out. So they have been warned. You can't break American law if you're going to do business in the United States.
The government is seeking to extradite the tech executive to the U.S. Huawei says it's unaware of any wrongdoings by Meng Wanzhou. Her next hearing is on Monday. John?
Jeff Paul in Los Angeles. Thanks. Meanwhile, the country is on pace for a record-breaking online shopping season. According to Adobe Analytics, Americans have spent more than $80 billion online since November 1st. That's nearly 20% more compared to the same period last year. The data also shows more people are shopping on their smartphones. A lame duck legislature accused of mounting a power grab against the incoming governor. But will the current governor sign it into law? Plus, a dangerous winter storm threatening to shut down cities across the South. The latest forecast as officials urge people to be prepared.
Even if current forecast doesn't show snow or ice expected where you live, that could change over the next 12 or 24 hours. It's time to hunker down and stay safe.
20 million people are under winter storm watches or warnings from New Mexico to North Carolina, where Governor Roy Cooper declared a state of emergency. He says North Carolina residents must take this storm seriously.
This is a snowstorm, not a snowfall. It's serious. We're preparing for days of impact, not hours. This weekend isn't the time to head out to see some winter wonderland. Stay safe where you are. Getting out on dangerous roads could put your life at risk. It also gets in the way of first responders and road crews who will be hard at work trying to keep us safe and clear our roads.
Forecasters say parts of North Carolina could see more than a foot of snow. After taking heavy losses in the midterms, Wisconsin's Republican-controlled legislature votes to impose new limits on the incoming Democratic governor. Matt Finn has the story.
Republicans in the Midwest took a big hit in the 2018 midterms, and Wisconsin was ground zero. Democrats taking back every statewide office, including attorney general and governor. But during a controversial lame duck session, GOP lawmakers voted to restrict the powers of the incoming Democrats, with many saying the move ignores the will of the voters.
People of Wisconsin expect better from us as leaders and leaders in the legislature than to pit people against each other.